This episode of Midco Sports Magazine is presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to Midco Sports Magazine. I'm Tom Neiman. This is Jason Andera. We got Carla Metz, David Brown, Jay Elson. This is Midco Sports Magazine. These people and some others that we have here at the network. Let's just start with that. We're going to take a look at some of our favorite stories from 2016, but what is this program to you guys? What does it allow you to do?
It's just fun to be able to tell the other stories that we don't get to tell with our shows, not just the box scores, but those stories underneath.
Yeah. The longer form, you can really get into some stories.
Yeah, connect with the viewers too. I think a lot of people, maybe they don't connect with a specific sport, but they can connect with the stories of the people that we shared those stories with. So I think that's important to kind of get everybody involved and get everybody interested in sports.
Yeah.
What Jason and Carla talked about, a lot of us come from a news background, and in there you're sort of limited in the amount of time you can tell a story. Here, as they said, you can go deeper into a subject, and that's what I appreciate the most.
I think you just kind of uncover more angles as you go through it. The chance to sit down with people and talk to them for maybe a half hour, maybe an hour, as opposed to 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, suddenly you might go in with one idea of how the story's going to go, and then based on that interview, it could go a totally different direction. That makes it a lot more fun.
For people like us, it's a beautiful thing to be in this business. It really is. We're going to take a look at some of the stories we're working on in 2017 coming up here, but we're going to take a look at some updates on some stories we did in 2016. Let's start with Carla and a story you did called The Wrestler. And it's on a female. Her name is Ronna Heaton. Give us a little synopsis on this.
Yeah, so just kind of where we left off with her. She's 17 years old. She wrestles for Brookings High School. And the reason we kind of started covering the story is because she was the first female to qualify for the South Dakota State Wrestling Tournament, which was a big deal, kind of made national headlines out there. And we just thought it would be a good idea to kind of check in with her. And by the time we had covered the story and it got out there, she had qualified for the second year in a row for the wrestling tournament, and she also won the Cadet World Championship out in Bosnia. So that was a really big deal to win on an international level.
If I'm a wrestler, the first thing, if I'm a guy wrestler, I mean, people are probably thinking about, what's that like, wrestling against a girl? Did you talk to her about that?
We did, and obviously that was kind of an interesting topic of conversation. And, you know, it wasn't a big deal for her, but you kind of talked to her coach at Brookings High School, and he had mentioned that there's a lot of kind of talk out there between the guys, and it's like some of the guys would even forfeit if they knew they would have to go up against her, which is kind of, you know, it would almost anger her. It would anger her because she's a competitor. She's an athlete that, you know, enjoys competition, and she wanted to compete, and so that would obviously upset her a little bit that they didn't want to compete against her. But then the coach said too, she's so good that you're almost scared to compete against her because you don't want to lose.
It's a no-win,
Yeah, I mean, she's knocked down a lot of walls, but
and she's been to 2 straight state tournaments.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of guys that haven't made 3 straight state tournaments. Is that one of the goals coming into the year for her?
To make a state.
Get back there again.
Yeah, that was a goal that she wanted to do, but then obviously she's wrestling nationally, internationally, all across the country. She's been to France, Sweden, all these different places, and she's so busy that she decided this year for her senior year, she's still 17, she'll turn 18 in March, but she decided to forego her senior season at Brookings High School to go, you know, kind of chase a dream of maybe even the Olympics one day. So it's pretty interesting.
And then as far as colleges are concerned, we've seen the rise of female wrestling programs in college. Greg Enkers did a story about Jamestown's program last year, so is she getting consideration from those programs?
Yeah, when we talked with her last year, she had heard from like almost all of them, but just a handful. Yeah, and then I kind of an update on her is she's heard from all of them, and then the schools that have recently added women's wrestling, she's now heard from them too. So she's got a lot.
Choice.
Yeah, she's got a lot of decisions to make, and she's hoping to make that maybe in May or June of this year.
That's the other cool thing about doing Midco Mag stories. You don't realize how many world-class athletes we have right in this area that we would never cover otherwise. So
yeah, it's very impressive.
David Brown did a couple of the more emotional, I guess you could call heavier stories that we aired in 2016. One was on a man named DJ Skelton, and this was kind of a hard story to do, wasn't it?
Very hard. He lives in California right now, but he's originally from Elk Point, grew up in Elk Point, South Dakota, and we had been searching for him. Our producer, Josh Muntz, had been searching for him for quite a while. We finally got a hold of him this summer, and what he does right now, he's a wounded warrior, and he works with a company called Paradox Sports to help people recover, both wounded warriors and other people with disabilities, through rock climbing. And the paradox is obviously self-explanatory, because I think rock climbing is the last thing you expect anyone with a major injury or a major disability to do. But he was one of those kids who wrestled in high school. He did track and field in high school, but just didn't know what he wanted to do after high school. He tried going to a semester at USD, and that didn't work out. And then he literally went to Sioux Falls, signed a piece of paper at an Army recruiter's office, and said, "Get me out of here." And this whole journey has taken him to the war in Iraq. He got severely injured. And after his injuries, he came back and served again. And I think he's a testament to everyone who's ever thought, what's my excuse? He had all these surgeries, he had all these injuries, and he went back to the front lines. And now he's working with Paradox Sports, and he really is an inspiration to not just wounded warriors and disabled people, but really everyone.
And you talked about Josh Muntz, our executive producer for this show. And he tracks down so many of these stories. Thanks, Joshy. We got to give him so much
That's
credit.
one that hasn't been covered by any other media, as far as I know. And when I watched it for the first time, I think it's really cool to be able to find somebody who's found their purpose and then can use that to just make a big splash. And he definitely has done that.
Absolutely. And you think about the no excuses thing I mentioned. He's had over 75 surgeries for all of his injuries, and it's just insane how much he continues to just sort of move forward. The physical limitations aside, but just the mental aspect of getting over being in the war and getting over these injuries. That's a whole nother ball game, and he's proving that anyone can do anything they set their mind to.
All right, another great story you can check out on YouTube at any time on our Midco Sports Network channel. A couple of football stories coming up next. We've got Jason's history of nine-man football in the Dakotas that's very interesting. Jay did a story on the Salem family and their coaching tree that has branched out all across the United States. As we go to break, here's our Kelly Stewart talking about a story she did in 2016 on a college pole vaulter trying to rise above the bar as a professional.
Well, one of the things I was most looking forward to when I got hired at Midco SN was being able to get more in depth with athlete stories, because I feel like there's always a story behind the score, behind the result. And doing my first Midco Mag story about Leslie Bross, being a post-collegiate athlete, it's not always as glamorous as people think with the pro athlete life. You're working side jobs in addition to training and going through all those vigorous things. But I think with Leslie, it wasn't like the hero story. She ended up not making it to the Olympics, but at the same time, there is that silver lining in the loss. And though all athletes will tell you they hate losing, Leslie really gave it her all, and she just laid all her chips out there. And when you do that, and however the chips may fall, you can still be satisfied and you gave it your all, and you might not have any regrets.
Midco Sports Magazine on Midco Sports Network is presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Welcome back to Midco Sports Magazine, following up on some of our favorite stories that we did in 2016. Jason Andera did a piece on nine-man football, and the hook to this thing, I think, is hardly anybody else in the country plays nine-man football except in our part of the world.
That's when we started to get interested in this story, as we realized nine-man football is only played in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. From that point, we knew that we had a cool story. We didn't know which direction to go with it, because do you go with the challenges that these nine-man teams face? Do you go with the small-town aspect of football? Do you go with the differences between nine-man? Do you go with why do we play nine? There's so many ways we could have gone with this story. So to pack it all in, it was hard to do in just a 6-7
You got all those elements in there.
We did find a way to do that.
And obviously you talked to Chad Greenway, who's from Stickney Mount Vernon.
He's a big fish.
Probably the most famous nine-man player in this region. Everyone does a Chad Greenway story, but he really seemed happy to talk to you and Josh just about being part of nine-man. And he mentioned that 11-man football, the first time he played, was his first down at Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, it was great that the PR department let us sit down with him. They gave us like 15, 20 minutes, and it ended up being about 45 minutes, because Chad just kept telling stories and stories, and he knew the exact score of the games in high school, and he knew the players he played against, and he just kept going on. And that is the sentiment you get with players who've played nine-man football. It just goes on and on and on. There's just a different thread that runs through these communities.
Well, and there's the players, there's the fans, there's the coaches, and there's no question that every one of those people are passionate about their brand of football. But my question is that people outside of that, people in bigger towns that maybe think there's too much nine-man football, particularly in the state of South Dakota.
South Dakota, you've
a
got
lot of conversation about condensing that, making fewer classes. Is that a realistic possibility, or are we seeing the way it's going to be?
Well, that's the reason we have 7 classes, and that's the thing that people get angry about. You got 7 classes in South Dakota. Well, 3 of those are 9-man. That's 90 9-man teams in South Dakota. And you're right, you could condense those. But there are small towns that just want to be small town football. Avon's, the single towns, Canastota just finally went to co-oping, and they don't want to let go of that heritage that they have in their small towns. So I understand both sides of it. I'm with you, Jay. I think fewer teams would actually make better football, and fewer classes would be good.
Well, it's an interesting contrast just state to state, because I believe Minnesota only has 1 class of 9-man. North Dakota only has 1 class, but we have 3 in South Dakota.
Yeah, that's the big difference. But they'll tell you they love that brand of football, and they keep playing it. And it's interesting, after we aired the story, I heard from so many people who played 9-man football. I talked to Steve Bruce, who said that his dad, John Bruce, actually was the first coach of a 9-man team. Just one conference started playing 9-man, and it grew from there, because it's so similar to 11-man. You just take the tackles out, but yet you can do it with fewer players. So that was the key.
Did Chad Greenway want to keep 9-man?
I didn't ask him about that, whether to keep 9-man or not, but boy,
It'd
that
be interesting to see what his take would be on that.
I would imagine he would want to keep it going. And like you said, to get back to Dave's point, the first time he played 11-man was walking on the field at Iowa, and he actually walked on the field, he told me, as a quarterback. He was recruited as a quarterback because in high school he was a quarterback in safety, which safety was kind of like a linebacker in 9-man football anyway. You just play the whole field. So, a lot of great stories from Chad.
All right, another one of our favorite football stories in 2016 was called Salem and Sons, done by Jay Elson, and this is one of the most famous coaching families in the Dakotas.
Yeah, and it's a really impressive legacy that they've started, and that continues to grow. It started with Nugent Salem way back in the 1930s. Then Joe Salem picked up the torch and ran with it. Now he's got several sons involved with it. Brad is currently the quarterback's coach and recruiting coordinator at Michigan State. Tim is the tight ends coach at Pittsburgh. Brent has spent time coaching football as well at the Division I level, at the Division II level, at the high school level. And then he's got another son, Wade, who coaches. So, I mean, it's a thing that they do. It's a family profession for sure, and obviously they've been very accomplished at it.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall at a family reunion. And do these guys talk football all the time?
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Or is it?
And Joe jokingly, referenced that toward the end of the story. I'll watch the games, and then I'll call him, and if I've got a question, I'll ask it. and you just get a sense. There's a lot of humor involved with it, but at the same time, they respect. Meeting Tim and Brad and Brent, those guys, they respect their father's opinions on things, and they very much value those conversations.
And Joe's got to be so proud of his boys. I'm sure you noticed that in his
pride.
In his interview.
I mean, he's proud of his entire family. He's proud of what he accomplished himself, and no question, he pays. He's the number one fan. I mean, when we interviewed him, he was wearing Michigan State gear, but there's no question. If he's sitting at home watching a Pittsburgh game, I guarantee you he's got some Pittsburgh gear on. He's very proud of everything that his sons have done to this point.
Probably the most familiar name in South Dakota right now is Brad, because he started at Augustana and then he's moved up, obviously at Michigan State now, and he's been rumored for a lot of other big Division I jobs. Michigan State, he's big enough, but other ones as well.
Yeah, this time of year, the coaching rumor mill really starts to swirl, and one of the things out there right now, and it's pure speculation, we don't know if there's any legs to it at this point yet or not, is that Brad's name has been floated as a possible offensive coordinator candidate at Pittsburgh, which would obviously reunite him with
Brad
Tim.
is at Michigan State right now as the quarterback's coach.
And that would give him a chance to work with his brother Tim, which professionally to this point is something he's not done. So certainly something over the next couple of weeks, couple of months to pay very close attention to, because that would be pretty fun to see those two guys end up on the same staff.
And another great part of that in the story is they've all got a connection to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
Joe played there, and the other sons have coached there.
Yep, Joe played there with the Gophers, their national championship team, and we all know it's kind of been all downhill from there for the Gophers. But then after that, Tim coached with Arizona State there, and then Brad got the chance to coach there with Michigan State. So, yeah, that's hallowed ground, as they said in the piece.
Yeah, going to be fun to keep following both those boys. As we sit here in Sioux Falls, though, we cannot forget about our brothers up north. Before he moved up to Grand Forks, Alex Heinert did a piece on a South Dakota high school high jumper named Zach Anderson. And our new guy, Brian Shawn, did a great piece on Carlin Dupree, a men's basketball player at North Dakota State.
Well, I'm a track guy and I'm a history buff, and so those two things made following Zach Anderson's pursuit of the South Dakota high school high jump record a lot of fun for me personally. It was great to follow him from town to town, from Beersford to Scotland, all the way up to Howard Wood, and even though he wouldn't get the mark, it was so exciting just to be there to see him try and do something amazing week in and week out. Plus, he's a great kid. He's going to do great things at the University of South Dakota.
Carlin has had quite a journey. Nothing about his journey here was easy. But he's always had a great attitude. He's worked really hard to get to this point. And even when he lost his way, he still learned something from the mistake he made. And to see where he is now as a senior is pretty special because he's a guy that didn't look like he was going to be with the team. And not only did he come back to the team, but he's also playing a major role with the team. He did in the Summit League tournament last year. And he's also playing a major role in his senior year now as one of the only two seniors on the squad that has made a big role. He started every game his senior year and continues to be one of those guys that has bounced back and really has appreciation for the opportunity he has, which I think is pretty cool.
This has been Midco Sports Magazine, presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Welcome back to Midco Sports Magazine, taking a look back at some of our favorite stories from 2016. And one of them was done by David Brown. It was called The Man from Flint. It's about a young man named DeAndre Parks at South Dakota State University. He was a basketball player. And this was our most shared and most liked story of 2016, I think, because there were so many elements in this story to like. Tell us about DeAndre Parks.
You hear about people overcoming obstacles, like, they have to overcome this one thing. If they overcome this one thing, they've reached the pinnacle and they've succeeded. What made DeAndre's story so fascinating is there was just layer after layer of multiple obstacles that he had to overcome. Grew up in Flint, Michigan, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the entire country, had an unstable family life. His dad left when he was 3. And when you live in a poor area, violence is often what becomes of that area. He had to overcome the violence in that area. And he overcame all that, went to a junior college, got to South Dakota State, and while he was at SDSU, he still had problems. We've all heard about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. 2 of his younger brothers have lead poisoning from the water in Flint. So it's not just that he made it to South Dakota State, got a scholarship as a basketball player, but he's still dealing with trouble back in Flint. And so I think all those layers to the story made him just an incredibly sympathetic character and someone that, honestly, no matter what team you have allegiance to, that you root for.
Yeah.
How many layers of this story did you know going in? Because you probably had to find out some of this along the way as you're interviewing.
I have relatives in Michigan, so I sort of knew about the Flint water crisis a little bit, and that's sort of where I got the basis of the idea. I'm like, DeAndre's from Flint, I wonder if he's having issues. I had no idea going in that his brothers had lead poisoning. That was something that was revealed to me during the interview, and the interview to me was what made this story so memorable because, as Jay said earlier, we get a longer period of time. DeAndre talked for an hour, and he was about one of the most unfiltered athletes I've ever encountered. Today people can be a little more buttoned up, be careful of what they say to people like us and other media, but he freely admitted that when one of his friends got killed, he and his other friends plotted a revenge. And you think about the fork in the road and if he had gone down that path and what would have become of his life, and the fact that he was so willing to admit that on camera was pretty revolutionary.
How long did this interview kind of stick with you? I know we do lots of interviews that are deep and kind of heartfelt, but sometimes like you walk away from an interview and we're better for it for knowing everybody's story, but how long did this story kind of stick with you, permeate, in your head?
It still sticks with me. Yeah. We did the interview, the story ran in March, we did the interview back in, I believe, January or February, and it still sticks with me, even a year later. And what's great about DeAndre, obviously, is that his whole goal was to get money and try and help his family back in Flint. And he knew the NBA probably wasn't an option, but he's currently overseas playing in the British Basketball League with a team called the Newcastle Eagles, and he's going to keep playing, obviously, as long as he can before he has to get a quote-unquote real job. But He has a degree from SDSU as well, so from a personal standpoint, he's doing whatever he can to help his family back in Flint.
Is there any update on his family and their situation?
They're still living in Flint. Obviously, I think we know the Flint water crisis is still ongoing. His brothers are still feeling the effects. His youngest brother has delayed speech skills. His 10-year-old brother has seizures sometimes. It's very, very sad, but obviously DeAndre is doing whatever he can from a financial standpoint. It kills him emotionally to be obviously overseas and away from his family, but he's doing what he can to help back home.
We saw him pay it forward at the end of the story, though, with bringing his brother. Is he still his guardian?
He is not his guardian, obviously, just because he's in England. His brother, unfortunately, had to go back to Flint. But as a college senior, being able to take his brother in Brookings and show him, that was probably the main thing, just to show him that if you get out of here, go to college, get a degree, you can improve your life. So his stay with DeAndre may have been short, but he's hoping that the impact will last for a long time.
So, I mean, and it kind of comes full circle. He's kind of a father figure to, in place of what he did not have.
Yeah, he's got 5 younger siblings, and as I said, he's working to become a better person. He has the degree, so once his basketball career does come to an end, he can find a job in a field that he wants to find it in. But if he can continue playing basketball, if his skills are still of need to a team like the team Newcastle Eagles in the British Basketball League, he'll keep playing it, and obviously he'll keep getting money for it. Those overseas guys do get a lot of money.
Yeah. Fun to follow him. He's playing well, too. He's averaging about 18 points a game for Newcastle, and they've got a pretty good team in that British Basketball League. Coming up in 2017, our producer Josh Muntz and all of these guys and all of our reporters are working on some more intriguing and inspiring stories. We will have a young man at St. Cloud State in Minnesota. He was born with cerebral palsy, but he is competing at a high level at collegiate wrestling. We've got a grandmother in South Dakota who remembers her grandson every year by sending up cards attached to balloons. She gets responses to her messages from several states away. And we've got to look at several basketball stories coming up in March, including one on Harold Thune, a South Dakota superstar in basketball in the 1930s who has had a lasting impact on the game in his home state of South Dakota. Thanks, guys. Enjoyed it. Looking forward to 2017.
Yeah, us too.
All right. You can see a new Midco Sports magazine every month here on Midco Sports Network. You can see it all the time on YouTube. Thanks for watching.
This has been Midco Sports Magazine, presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.